After disappointing showings in the 1983 and 1987 general elections, the SDP, founded in 1981 as a new third party in British politics, voted to merge with the Liberal Party with whom they'd been in alliance for those elections. The merged party, named the Social and Liberal Democrats, was launched in March 1988 and changed its name to just the Liberal Democrats a year later. And in the US, General Ira C. Eaker died at the age of 91. He had begun his flying career on single-engine fighters, but made his name as a bomber commander, most famously as the first commander of the US 8th Air Force, based in the UK during World War II. He was an advocate of precision bombing, flying in daylight and attempting to hit strategic targets while minimising civilian casualties. Later, he commanded all of the Allied air forces in the Mediterranean theatre. After retiring from the newly formed US Air Force in 1947, he worked in the aviation industry and was, by special act of Congress, awarded an official promotion from 3 to 4-star general in 1985. The F1 gang had been a bit busy with just a week between races for any developments in the paddock. Nigel Mansell would be marking his 100th race start, René Arnoux his 120th, Azella their 100th, and Honda their 100th as an engine supplier, amid rumours that they might be about to ditch their successful partnership with Williams. A press conference to announce their 1988 plans had been called, but then deferred to the next race in Italy. Mansell himself had been suffering from a painful abscess on a wisdom tooth for a while, and had finally had to have it out between races, as he described to the BBC.
I think 100 races is something to celebrate, something of a milestone. 10 wins so far, and who knows what we'll bring tomorrow. I'm with a great team now, and things couldn't be better, really, in some ways. As for the tooth, well, I've been avoiding that for 4 years, so I didn't have much choice on Thursday, but it's getting a little better.
How does it feel? Did it affect your driving, did you feel?
On the first day it was dreadful, yeah. I didn't realise how bad I was until I woke up this morning and I felt much better. And even now this evening I don't feel too good again, but hopefully tomorrow it will be even better again.
Have they been freezing the tooth, or what have they been doing to him?
Yeah, draining it off and freezing it. There's only so much one can do, but the nice thing is that it's out now, so once it does get better, it will be okay. There won't be anything there.
But despite feeling dreadful, he didn't seem to have lost any of his speed. Friday qualifying got underway with the stands packed with Austrians and Italians keen to see their new hero Gerhard Berger in action after his heroics here last year. The Ferraris had looked good in Hungary, so they were optimistic for a change, though how the cars would do on this power-heavy circuit remained to be seen. Derek Warwick, having recovered from his own flu and conjunctivitis, had a spin in the spare arrows on Friday and ended up stranded out on the racing line, and it seemed to take the marshals some time to remove the stricken arrows, during which time it was nearly hit by both Benettons on their flying laps, while the famous bumps of the Österreichring seemed to be playing havoc with the active suspension on the Lotus cars, leaving Senna and Nakajima unhappy at their times and hoping it would get fixed overnight. The slightly chaotic first day of practice was capped off when a deer got onto the track, trying to flee from the noise of cars coming from all around. For 10 minutes, the poor confused thing wandered around on the track until Stefan Johansson came over the brow of the Rindt curve and hit it square on at north of 160 miles an hour, killing it instantly and sending him skidding into the barriers, destroying what was left of his McLaren. Stefan was, needless to say, spitting feathers after the accident, which he felt should never have happened because the track officials should have ended the session or at least shown yellow flags, and wasn't exactly complimentary about the bumpy track either when interviewed on race morning.
Do you think it's bumpier this year than last year?
Well, it's certainly not less bumpy because they've done absolutely nothing to improve the track.
It certainly looks it. I mean, watching cars out on the track, they seem to be all over the place.
Yeah, it's very bad.
But is this a track, in spite of your bad luck here, is it a track you've liked?
It's a nice track to drive on, but I mean, I'm not very happy about the incident yesterday. In fact, I'm furious. I mean, you could have had a lot more serious incident than what we did have.
His car had been so comprehensively demolished that he would be in the spare for the rest of the weekend, and McLaren flew their test car out from Woking to act as an extra spare in case it was needed. Both McLaren drivers had found their cars a handful, with their back ends skittish over the bumps, which was one reason Stefan was so annoyed about them. And then, on Saturday morning, the heavens opened and nobody was going to improve their times. The Lotus boys couldn't test any suspension settings, and there were more than a few long faces in the Lotus and McLaren pits, as their cars would be much further back than usual. So the grid for the race was decided by Friday's session, with Piquet taking pole at an average speed of 160.2 miles an hour, the fastest of any circuit in current use. Mansell tigered through his tooth pain to take second, also beating Fabi's 1986 pole time, with Berger a popular third in the Ferrari. Next came the two Benettons, with Boutsen in his best grid slot of the year, followed by Fabi, then Alboreto 6th. Senna was back in 7th, Patrese, now being tipped for the Williams seat, 8th, and saying that was about as fast as the Brabham could be made to go, ahead of Prost in 9th and De Cesaris 10th. The Arrowses were on row 6, both suffering fuel pickup problems that meant they both had to qualify with extra fuel on board, then Nakajima, 13th on a circuit he actually knew from his F3000 days. Johansson was back in 14th after his escapades, then Nannini and Arnoux, Brundle feeling like he was making some progress in the Zach speed, Ghinzani, Campos, and Danner, who'd had a misfire all weekend. Caffi was the last of the turbos as usual, with Alio leading the 3.5 litre cars, followed by Capelli, Palmer, Streff, and as usual, Fabre, this week 17.5 seconds off pole. By Sunday morning, the weather had perked up, which, as Philippe Alliot explained, was counterintuitively good news for the normally aspirated cars.
Why is it that on a fast circuit you have that much more chance than on a slow circuit?
It's very simple. It's because the track like this or like Hockenheim are very, very hard for the turbo engine, you know. And many cars broke her engine during the race, and there's no many cars at the end. That's why with the atmospheric engine, we have not the same problem. And for us, hot or very long straight or very quick track or fuel problem, we don't have this problem, and for us it's easier to finish the race. That's why in Hockenheim you have 3 atmospheric cars in the point, and perhaps some atmospheric car in the point tomorrow if it's very hot.
And Lotus had chance to test out their new suspension settings, though Senna was not entirely happy with them. But he would just have to make do, as the cars lined up for the start and the green light came on. Piquet and Mansell got away well as you'd expect, but Boutsen got an absolute flyer, blasting past Berger into third. Further back, though, Martin Brundle hit the infamous bump on the hill and slowed sideways, sending both Ligiers onto the grass avoiding him, with Arnoux bouncing off Nannini in the process, while off-camera the two Tyrrells collided and were left on the pit straight. Out came the red flags, almost the traditional start to an Austrian Grand Prix. In all the excitement, Boutsen had made his way up to second, but it would avail him nothing. So, after half an hour of getting ready all over again, all 26 cars were able to retake the start, some in spare cars, others after hasty repairs. The lights went green again, and away they went once more. Mansell got away, but then lurched almost to a stop as his clutch slipped, causing a bottleneck on the very narrow pit straight, with the inevitable result. When the dust cleared, there were no fewer than 12 cars stationary on the track, and there would be a third start. Once again the mechanics outdid themselves, and only Streff was left without a drive, although 4 cars would have to take the start from the pit lane. That became 5 when Prost failed to get away in the parade lap, and 6 when Alboreto peeled in at the end of it, but finally over an hour and a half after the first attempt, the lights went green on the Austrian Grand Prix. Again. Mansell was slow away again, dropping back as Boutsen again got a great start to go second, and Senna's spare Lotus didn't want to go anywhere without a bit of persuasion, but go it eventually did, and the race was finally underway, with Piquet leading Boutsen, Berger, Mansell, Fabi and the Brabhams around the first lap. The Belgian in the Benetton really seemed to have the bit between his teeth and was all over the back of Piquet like a cheap suit, ducking and weaving, looking for a way past, but the V6 Honda just had a wee bit more grunt than the V6 Ford, and Thierry couldn't quite make it stick as the first 5 were already drawing away from Patrese, in 6th, who was now chased by Warwick, who managed to get himself between the two Brabhams. Further back, Prost, Senna and Alboreto were running 17th, 18th and 19th at the end of lap 2 and were coming through the field. Local hero Berger began to drop off the leaders at the end of lap 3, soon finding himself with Mansell and Fabi right behind. Mansell came through on the start-finish straight as Piquet lapped a cruising Stefan Johansson, whose weekend was going from bad to worse. Now in the spare car, having demolished the spare in the second start, he'd already been in for tyres on lap 2, but one wheel nut hadn't been tightened properly and his front right was wobbling dangerously. By the time he made the pit, it had come off entirely. Berger's challenge ended after just 5 laps with a turbo failure, which was why he'd slowed suddenly a couple of laps earlier, by which time both Minardis had also pulled off with technical failures. So that budged everyone behind Berger up a place, putting Warwick into the points just ahead of De Cesaris and Nakajima, with the charging Senna now up to 9th already and unlikely to be held up by his teammate, especially when the Japanese driver had a puncture and had to roll round to the pits for a new tyre. Piquet and co went flying past the ailing Lotus, with the top three now running close together, while Senna had now made it into 6th place, albeit some 38 seconds behind Piquet, and with Alboreto right on his gearbox, pushing him hard all the way. On lap 15, Boutsen fumed into the pits to have his gearbox looked at, but it turned out to be a relatively quick fix and he returned to the track just in time to emerge right in front of Piquet. So on lap 20 of 52, it was once again two Williamses at the front, with Fabi now a rather distant third. Alboreto was having an absolutely barnstorming race, mostly off camera, and had now taken 4th, with Patrese 5th and Senna 6th. Boutsen's Benetton seemed to be going just as well as it had been before his stop, and he was easily able to keep ahead of Piquet as they all came up to lap Nakajima, who was himself lapping Palmer. The Williamses caught the pair of them just as Nakajima pulled out and balked Palmer slightly, which gave Mansell the opportunity he needed to dive out and take the lead. Piquet made the instant call to pit for tyres at the end of his 21st lap, followed by Fabi, who overshot his pit and had to go round again, and then his right rear wouldn't go on properly. Mansell made his own stop a couple of laps later, a good stop putting him on the road still ahead of Piquet to the tune of 9.5 seconds, and Nelson had it all to do after getting stuck in traffic and being unable to make the most of his fresh tyres. Mansell set a new lap record, only for Piquet to break it as he tried to chase his teammate down. Fabi was somehow still third, although he was now 50 seconds down from Mansell and had Alboreto right behind him, and Prost and Senna were now 5th and 6th and close behind the Ferrari. Mansell was making his way through traffic now, giving Piquet a chance to narrow the gap even further, and he had a moment when he followed Warwick past Capelli's march, only for the Italian to apparently not notice the second car and nearly take Mansell out. Johansson's weekend continued being a nightmare when he made his planned mid-race stop, only for that right front wheel to stick again, sending him back out 18th. A cracking three-way scrap over third, meanwhile, had developed between Fabi, Alboreto and Prost, until the Benetton ran slightly wide on lap 33 and the other two piled past, with Prost then taking third from the Ferrari a few corners later, which was not bad going considering he'd started the race from the pit lane and was very unhappy with the handling of his car. Senna was the next to catch and pass Fabi, as he also chased Alboreto and Prost, as Chiva suffered a tyre blowout and was out, remarkably the first retirement since Berger some 25 laps earlier. He was joined a couple of laps later by De Cesaris and Warwick, both having BMW engine failures. Piquet was by now some 20 seconds behind Mansell and had apparently decided to settle for yet another second place, still with a comfortable championship lead over his teammate, and Senna meanwhile had been so keen to get past Alboreto that he'd collided with him and had to come in for a new nose, returning to the track 9th and 2 laps adrift. As the race entered its last 10 laps, Prost suddenly slowed, his turbo beginning to fade, with Alboreto and Fabi both retaking their places for him, only for Michele to dribble into the pits to retire with a turbo failure of his own. He was joined a lap later by his compatriot Patrese, another dud BMW, as the field suddenly seemed to be dropping like flies. Prost lost 4th to Boutsen, who was running with a loose undertray, and then 5th to Senna, but at the front it had all been over for some time. Mansell cruised to his 4th win of the year in his 100th race, with Piquet following him home now nearly a minute behind to take his 6th runner-up spot of the year and give Honda a 1-2 result in their 100th race. Remarkably, the Japanese manufacturers had never actually finished in Austria before. 3rd and 4th were the Benettons of Fabi and Boutsen, the latter finishing the race exactly where he'd started it, despite all the drama in between, with Senna and Prost rounding out the point scorers. Stefan Johansson was 7th, missing out on a point to cement a thoroughly miserable weekend, with Ghinzani 8th, and Brundle finishing 9th but disqualified for a bodywork infringement. Capelli took the 3.5 litre category, followed by Aleo and Palmer, with Fabra still running as usual but 7 laps down and unclassified, so no points for him this time round. It had been a bit of a shambolic race from the organisational point of view, and as if to underline the fact, as Mansell, Piquet and Fabi made their way to the podium in the back of an open course car, Nigel stood up at just the wrong moment and wanged his head on a low bridge. Murray Walker asked him about it afterwards in a clip that has become something of a classic.
Nigel, first of all, will you carefully and slowly take your hat off? You've got an enormous bump on your head. Can you let them see it?
I don't know whether...
Right up there. Oh, I'm sorry.
So, Mansell was now 15 points behind Piquet with 6 races to go, while Piquet had scored 8 times and could only count his best 11 results, so while Nigel was still only 3rd in the table, he could still be looking good as the business end of the season approached. Meanwhile, McLaren's woeful weekend meant that although they remained 2nd place in the constructors' race, they would need something pretty special to prevent Williams from retaining that title.